So we have Jordan Chinn, Network Manager of Innovation Group, joining us today. Rob Hopkins, Insurance Claims Operations Specialist, and Paul Sell, Director of Trend Tracker. So, plenty going on, as per usual, with the disclaimer on these live shows. So the views and opinions expressed during the following webinar are those of the individual contributors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the contributor, employer, organisation, committee or other group or individual. Please respect any or contributions, and we encourage you to join the conversation via the interactive functions available. I haven't read that for some time. That was about April, I think we did our last live session. So big thank you to our corporate partners, as always, those who power ARC360, so BASF, BMS, CAPS, Copart, Emacs, Integral, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Innovation Group, Mercer, Nationwide Vehicle Recovery Assistance, S&G Response and Sherwin-Williams, as well as our partners Aztec, the Green Part Specialists in Darsa and Presco UK. So let's have a little welcome introduction from our panelists today. So I'll jump across to you first, Paul, if I may. And you've been a busy man recently with another report from the Trend Tracker stables.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Yeah, so Paul Sell, for those that don't know, working for Trend Tracker and Service Certainty in my Trend Tracker guide today. As you say, just finished the August monthly update for subscribers, as well as the EV readiness report, which has taken quite a lot of putting together, but we're really, really pleased with it. And hopefully, for those that have seen it already or will see it from Thursday when it's launched, they like it. So thanks, Mark. Yeah.
There you go. Thought I'd give you the free plug there, Paul, to kick off with. And Rob, maybe a slightly different summer for yourself, but how goes it?
Yeah, I've been enjoying a bit of a career break and enjoying a sabbatical at the moment, but. Yeah, my recent history, as you know, Mark, has been actually in the non-motor area, so formerly at Ageas, and heading up their non-motor claims operations, but also spent quite a few years in the motor sector, heading up the front office, back office, bodily injury departments as well.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and again, always nice to see the world from another side and from the outside kind of thing, and bringing to the fore, obviously, your previous in the motor insurance world. So thanks for joining us, Rob. And Jordan, a busy man there at Innovation Group. I know there's plenty going on. So how have you been the last couple of months?
Well, it's definitely been interesting. I think that's the word I like to use. Interesting. It's very busy, which is a good problem to have, because it's not something I think the industry had to say before, but it's getting there, right? It's getting there, and we'll talk about that today. But it's good to be back on these webinars. You know, I'm a big fan, Mark, so thanks for inviting me back, and hopefully it's a good one.
Absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much for joining us. So what I thought we'd do is we will get back to the screen, and we'll just zip through the stats. So this is part of our market intelligence report, which is in partnership with Trend Tracker. So we'll send all this round or distribute this today. So we look at the Apple Mobility Trends report, and we are specifically looking at, obviously, traffic volumes here, mobility trends. So driving plus 37% on their sort of baseline figure there. So good signs there. We look at the Google COVID-19 Community Mobility Report. We've stuck with kind of Greater London and Greater Manchester, and what we've done there is referenced it 2nd of the 9th, so last week's retail and recreation, public transport and workplaces, and then in the left hand corner there you've got the relation back to July and what those figures were there. So not a great deal of change there. Same thing, Greater Manchester, retail and recreation, public transport, workplaces. Again, bottom left-hand corner is what we had tail end of July. You can see, again, not a great deal of change there. Where it starts to get a little bit interesting is the Tomtom live traffic data. Again, we've stuck with Bristol. Nothing more behind that than that's what we chose originally. And you can start to see the mobility patterns there in terms of that live congestion. Again, we'll come on to talk about it, but what we're typically seeing is those peak hours that we perhaps used to have, the morning and the evening rush hour, Not so prevalent throughout the week, almost builds towards a Friday where it gets busy Saturday, Sunday. But we do see more traffic on the roads between the hours of 9 till 5, if you like, and you can see that across in the daily and weekly congestion level pattern dots there. Birmingham, Wolverhampton, again, similar kind of trends being observed, but we will discuss that in due course. And here we've got the DFT, Department for Transport, their graph in terms of, it's a bit of a difficult one to digest, this one, but goes all the way back to the 1st of March 2020. All motor vehicles, heavy goods vehicles, light commercial vehicles and cars. And I know Paul's done some work around these numbers, so he'll no doubt fill us in there. We've got the CAPS data, and this is the unique claims exchange analysis, and this is on a regional basis. So again, we can have a bit more of a delve into these numbers, but you can see fluctuations across the various regions that CAPS works across. And also we've got the repair estimate volumes, which is the trend tracker stroke outer text data here, where you can see the pattern emerging 2019, 2020 and 2021, with also the forecast or prediction moving ahead. So I'll start with you, if I may, Paul. You're obviously fully immersed in all of this information right now, producing reports regularly and obviously bigger reports as well, quarterly. What are you making of the world and all the numbers at the moment?
Well, that's a big question. How long have we got? I think in summary, the last couple of months have certainly been more consistent. If you look back at your graphs just there, I think you just said that there isn't much change in the gig mobility stats, or the Apple ones really. The Department of Transport graph shows a fairly steady line now over the last month or two. Repair volumes are sort of consistently 15% higher in the last 3 months compared to the 3 months prior to that. They're slightly up and down, but generally now at a reasonable level of around 130,000. So actually, yeah, I think for me, it looks like we're starting to see a more consistent level now, which makes business planning a little bit easier, because it's been really hard to predict and plan and forecast over the last 18 months of all the different restrictions. But I think September will be very telling. I think September could be a record month since the pandemic began, as schools have gone back and more people have gone back to work, which I'm sure we'll come on to later in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that DFT data, I think we did a little story on it yesterday. I think the average, it's now at 101% of pre-COVID levels. Traffic volumes, this is all sort of mobility types on the road. July was 100%. So, the movement there. But I think what is also significant is that change in that pattern, i.e. weekdays are still lower than where we were, weekends are higher.
Yeah, definitely. The commuting patterns are still slightly spread, I think. And that's not, I guess that's to be expected. We've been in school holidays, haven't we? So if you've got a flexible working pattern and you've got children at home, that's not going to be as pronounced as it was before. But now we're back at school. Most of us are back, kids back at school. I think it'll be interesting to see how those traffic patterns now change in September. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I noticed that there was 85%, fuel sales were 85% of the equivalent in 2019, despite EVs having a 15% market share. So you would therefore think things are almost where they were before in terms of traffic and congestion use.
Great stuff. Thanks, Paul. Now, Jordan, I'll jump across to you because you're sort of seeing this firsthand. So the surge, if you like, it's probably a bit of a exaggeration, but June seems to have been the peak month thus far, and then there's been a bit of a tail off July, August, and as Paul says, it's sort of started to settle. What are you seeing from your side of the fence?
So I think we anticipated volume to be about 110% of pre-COVID numbers throughout the summer break. That didn't quite materialise for us. We saw highs of about 104% at its peak, but lows of about 85%. And that consistency makes it really difficult to manage, both for internally, talk about headcount and things like that, but for the network that we manage as well. Trying to get the right level of capacity when repairers don't necessarily know how many jobs are going through the door for 1 month to the next. So It's not been easy, and there are some regional variations to that as well, which makes things even trickier.
Yeah, we'll come back to that regional piece as well, because I know you've got a little bit more on that we'll pick up on. And Rob, from an insurer side, you see all this data. We're hearing that that consistency, and that's probably a key part for insurers, is to look at these things and have some sort of consistency where you can make these plans. What do you start to read into that data? Where else do you look, and how do you start to build that pattern or plan moving ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's really important when we get into these leading measures, and really understanding those, predicting where we are, and it's important to insurers and to the sort of holy trinity, as I call it, in insurance companies, of actuarial, claims and underwriting. The actuaries will be certainly looking at the frequency, looking at the costs coming through, and checking that those loss ratios that they predicted are behaving themselves and are following through. Underwriters, certainly now starting to see that come through, will be asking themselves those serious questions on rating and whether the rates are where they need to be, and that's a huge decision for underwriters. We know that you put rate in, you can increase rate, and it has an almost immediate impact on market share. So that's something that underwriters will look at. And of course, the claims department there, looking at the frequency, how that influences how claims departments are running their operation, and where they need to deploy resource and how they meet the demand that's presented, and of course following through from that, the average cost as well. And that's really the truth behind the claims performance. I think we've all seen the half-year results that have come through from insurers now, and insurers all comment on the frequency in motor, and but not to be misled by that, because it's been in a flattering position for the first half of the year for an insurer. The truth, as I say, behind it is the average cost of those claims, and those inflationary pressures that are coming through there.
Yeah, and of course we are sort of starting to, or seeing those numbers increase again. Paul, we did a piece on that, didn't we, a little while back, where we were talking about that cost of repair, and you've done some research on it yourself.
Yeah, it has definitely. I mean, it's definitely gone up year on year, as Rob just said. Really, again, though, I think from what I can see, the last 2 or 3 months, that seems to have settled into a more consistent pattern. So I think as you've got a greater volume of repairs coming back into the market, the average is going to start to show a more predictable place, but obviously it's still gone up considerably compared to 2020 and 2019. Largely, I think, as we concluded last time, Mark, at a lot of parts.
Yep, and of course we still have various supply chain challenges, should we say, out there in the market at the moment. So, Jordan, if I can come back to you then, in terms of kind of, we've got all this data and it we can see it. But again, in the real world, how is that kind of translating? You've already said in terms of, your prediction on volumes, it provided you with real challenges in terms of that consistency. But, are we seeing geographically variations? Is an average kind of, a good thing to look at? Or actually, if we looked at a map, would we be saying, hey, it's a completely different scenario in the southwest, or for example?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have to split that really in terms of how we at Innovation Group are forecasting. So we're looking to plan everything based on 80 to 85% of pre-COVID numbers across the board. We're really lucky actually, because we've got some really understanding clients. We've got really a very collaborative relationship with all of them. So by working with our clients and getting to understand the impact of everything related to COVID, hybrid working and things like that, we are able to have pretty accurate and resilient capacity management program in place. But it does, as I said before, it does differ massively regionally, and the usual hotspots for that are staycation areas, so the South Coast and particularly down the southwest corner of Devon. The capacity there is difficult to manage. There is a finite amount of body shops down there. and an ever increasing amount of claim volume, because let's be honest, that's where everyone's going right now, and that's where they're going to have claims.
Yeah, and I suppose that that in itself presents a problem as we've kind of re-emerged from COVID. There's been obviously lots of chopping and changing, people trying to maybe secure new contracts, different work provision type agreements, and when it starts to kind of build back up, I suppose that's when, arguably it's a nice problem to have, but probably doesn't make your life particularly easy in terms of managing all of that.
No, very true. It's been difficult because obviously repairers had a much lower volume, so they were in a position at one point where, not too long ago, mind you, where they were speaking to existing and new work providers for additional volume. Some would have come through on that. Some of that would have come to fruition. Some wouldn't. But now they're in a position, most of them are anyway, where they may have too much volume and they have to sort of question, is it sort of last in, first out? And we then look to do a complete U-turn on the work providers that have helped us out through this difficult period, or do we instead look to support our more long-standing partners? And that's a really difficult decision to make, and it's totally unique, I think, down to each individual business on what decision they do make on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Paul, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the point that you've made there, Jordan, about planning and how difficult it was. A good example being the summer holidays, of course, where it's normally a relatively quiet time, but I think I noticed that Easter were reporting a 761% increase in UK holiday searches on Google. So Devon and Cornwall were incredibly busy. And as you say, that also came at a time where some staff were probably still furloughed as well, because that hadn't quite finished, or was almost finished. So I think we almost had little pockets of really busy areas centered around holiday staycations in July and August.
Yeah, there's certainly been plenty of kind of forces impacting, well, obviously not only on our industry, but businesses the world over. And Rob, I'm going to come to you again on this one. And again, it's kind of obviously an insurer one, but it's one for every business really. But historical data, that's the thing that this industry typically thrives upon. What happened last year? Will it happen the same this year, etc.? Is that all blown out of the water now? In terms of, can we make those predictions anymore? Are we in a whole new realm of this with sort of volumes and claims data, etc.?
It's a good question. We don't dismiss that historical data because some of that data is, and the data is again, it's looking back, but it does give us a good basis of where to come from. But I think what we see more of are these leading measures, these predictors, whether that's, as I say, geographical, or whether that's business, customer behavior. So I think we see both of them, but certainly the leading measures rather than the lagging measures beginning to play more of a part in the operation and what the operation really pays attention to. But that said, it's important to understand where we've come from, and it's important to recognise those trends and accept that what we have been through has been remarkably, and it's been remarkable, it's been unusual, but there is that return to normality. And I don't want to go back and say the phrase new normal, because that seemed to be bandied around an awful lot last year. But there is a normality that comes back. And that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with customers as well. Certainly, as we go to our restaurants for meals and go to the pub for a pint and get back to work and schools opening up, the customer's perception is everything is now normal. And as I say, perception is reality, and we have to respond to that very quickly.
Yes, yeah, and it's again, I'm sure everyone in their individual lives is experiencing that return to whatever we want to cast it as normality. Industry events, ours being one, are back now, and people are getting out and about, and that confidence, I think, is sort of growing in people, in the sense that we are back out there now as a society more, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think there's been I will just touch on a customer trust piece as well. Customers have been very understanding, as long as insurers have been and repairers have been open in their communication and transparent with customers. There's been a real trust that's built up, and certainly when I was listening to calls and so on, you'd hear that with the interaction when customers might hear dogs barking in the background or children playing. It humanizes what we do, and that's built up some trust and understanding. But it's fragile, and that's why we can't rely on COVID and the restrictions that were in place to excuse any sort of poor service, whether that's in the insurer side or getting cars back on the road. That's fragile, so it's just something to be cautious of.
Great observation. Absolutely agree. Very, very interesting. And you do start to hear comments of people getting, fatigued of COVID excuses, if you like. And it's, as you say, a very fragile relationship. Completely agree. Paul, I'm going to skip back to you because I know there's much more to this than purely kind of, traffic volumes, things on the road, and you've been covering lots of different bases. So supply chain issues, new sales versus used sales, there's obviously a dynamic there that's changing. Economic indicators, you're looking at all these things, external forces, furlough coming to an end, increasing skills crisis in the industry. That is all having an effect right now, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that you can look back and use the historical data to start to predict where claims volumes might be going forward now. I think on a slightly more consistent basis, but I think claims costs is entirely different. And yes, there's lots of good economic indicators. If you go into any of the Office of National Statistics or various sources, there's lots of positive economic data at the moment, which suggests that businesses are bouncing back, which is great. But this particular issue around new car sale production, chip shortage, etc., is causing some really weird situations, like used car values being the highest they've ever been, and they continue to be. And I just think from an insurer perspective, that must be an interesting conundrum around top losses, because you may therefore want to repair more vehicles, keep more vehicles on the road, which is another challenge for Jordan to plan with. But also, if you do write a car off, it's not going to be very easy to replace it, because you can't get them for 20, 30 weeks with some manufacturers. So I think the whole customer experience in that kind of situation, and the knock-on impact to the supply chain in itself, really thinking about repairers and where we are in this industry, is one that's a real life topic.
And Jordan, sort of any thoughts on that in terms of how it impacts, what you do as a business and your role in all of this?
Well, Paul brought up a very relevant point about how the PAV is increasing, and therefore we are looking to repair more vehicles, which is good news for repairers, but at the same time, the parts issues sort of mitigate that benefit that the repairers would usually reap. So it is pretty difficult. I think one thing that we've tried to do with our teams is stay relevant in terms of scripting, because COVID has by no means disappeared. I think just touching a little bit on some of the things that Rob mentioned, that customer trust that we have gained, we do need to retain. It is, I absolutely agree with Rob, it's very fragile. So we want to make sure that the customers feel like we've got a secure service for them, and the repairers have done a terrific job doing that up to this point. So we just need to continue that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And Rob, I'll sort of bounce this one back to you as well. In terms of all those other things that are impacting on human behaviours, the economy, the wider economy, Paul's already touched upon the availability of vehicles. How does that all stack up internally with an insurer in terms of their judgment calls and how they make decisions?
Yeah, I think I'd break that down again into three areas for a claims department in particular. Customer, we've already touched on, and that customer experience, and ensuring that we're meeting those customer expectations, and we have the right measures in place that are tracking that. We also have the operational expense, so the budget, and that's a really important one as well. So what resources do we need? Where do we deploy them, given the results that we're seeing? And it's important as well because that's where the capacity comes from. That's where the money comes from to invest in new technologies, or looking at how we move forward with innovations in the industry. So that's how insurers are looking to connect, and you can't back everything. You've got to pick the ones that are going to give you most return on investment and are doing the right things for your operation. So that's a really critical one as well, and digitization and automation that comes under that ops expense sort of area. And of course you've got the third area, the big number, which is indemnity control, which we've touched on, frequency and average cost, and on that average cost point, what insurers are really wrestling with in the motor market is what, and it's the same in non-motor, what is market driven, what is affecting our competitors as much as ourselves. What commercial advantages can we get out of that? So looking at that inflation, but then at the other level, looking at, well, what about our processes? How much of that inflation is coming through how the insurer operates, the processes that we have, the strategies we employ, and also the culture that the insurer has. So there's that is something that again is firmly on the radar, and again you see it being referenced in half-year results, many insurers' half-year results around that average cost inflation in vehicle is something that's really getting under the microscope.
Interesting stuff. I can see a whole separate webinar coming to life there, Rob. So thank you for committing to that. So any questions from the audience, please fire away. These three are obviously more than willing to answer any queries you may have, or any comments. Just drop them in the chat. Let's kind of do the old crystal ball moment where everyone kind of ducks away very quickly, or their line drops out. But it is the thing that everybody talks about, and we've kind of alluded to it already. Q4, and I said to all three of you, I feel like we sat here this time last year saying the very same thing. It's going to be a big period in terms of what actually happens to the sector with everything that's going on. Not just mobility, traffic volumes, but back to school, people going back to work, furlough ends, etc., etc. Where do we start? Where do we kind of start to think about that towards, as we go, and dare I say September, towards the tail end of the year? Rob, I'm coming straight back to you on that one.
Yeah, I think again, much depends on any future restrictions, and I think we all want to try and avoid that. But we'll see what comes down the line. What I would say is most workplaces now are set for that. The hybrid working environment, you see a lot more capacity and capability around remote working. So that work commute sort of pattern, I think that probably is disrupted for going forward, and I think that may well be here to stay, because we've really shown, certainly in the insurance area, and it's the same with across other industries, that what we thought could never be done from home can be done from home, and perhaps it's using the office in a different way. So I think that's that pattern is here to stay. Fabulous.
Jordan, across to you, if I may. So predictions for the rest of the year, and we won't hold you to this, by the way.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Hence why you gave it to me. So thanks for that, Mark. But I'll stick with what I said before, in that we're looking at around 80 to 85% of pre-COVID numbers for this time of year as well. There's so many impacts on that. Hybrid working, as Rob mentioned, that creates huge fluctuations, because a significant proportion of claim volume came from the sort of peak hour traffic where everyone's rushing around and accidents happen. I think what we are starting to accept is that rush hour, it may be a 2 or 3 hour period now. So it's over a longer period of time, but perhaps less claim volume per hour. And we're having to sort of make plans for that as well. But the difficulty I think that we're finding is the inconsistency isn't just a problem for us internally with regards to headcount and things like that I mentioned earlier. But one thing we really strive to do as a business is communicate with our network and make sure that all of our repair partners understand the sort of levels of capacity that we might need from them over the next couple of months. And that's not something we can be very detailed or specific about. So I think the one sort of learning we've had over this whole period is communication is key, and just be as clear as possible and touch base with as many people as often as you can to at least provide some layer of security for everyone involved.
Great stuff, Jordan. Thank you very much. And Paul, across to you, because obviously you're kind of tracking these estimate claim volumes as we go. So you're kind of a bit more out there in the public domain as towards predicting these things.
I agree with what both the guys have said so far. So I think Rob's right. I think a hybrid working or flexible working is here to stay, but not to the extent it has been in the pandemic. Particularly now schools are back. I'll be slightly more optimistic than you, Jordan. I think we're going to get around to 90% of pre-pandemic levels. I think September is going to be really interesting. I think two things. I think September could be a record month since pre-pandemic for volumes, based on what we're seeing. And I think September could be the first month where there's more battery-operated vehicles sold than internal combustion engine cars. So I think in August it was something like 52% versus 48 or somewhere like that, and it's been growing every month. So I think you could see that tip in September for the first time to be more EVs sold than non-EVs, which is also a really interesting tipping point. The only other thing to mention that we haven't already is that the sale of commercial vehicles is still booming. So I think from a repairer perspective, if it was me, I'd be focusing on light commercial vehicles, electric vehicles, and make sure I was prepared for what could be an increase in work from those two areas in the next 3 to 6 months.
There we go. You heard it here first. Right, I've already booked you three in. Well, I have just now anyway for a catch up in December. So we'll do this again, and we'll see who was right with all of this. But great stuff, guys. Really, really appreciate your time. Again, we kind of, we said 2:15, but we appreciate everyone's time. So these are kind of little sound bites that we're doing now. But if anyone's got any questions, fire them in the Q&A whilst we are here. Just want to give a big shout out once again to our corporate partners, BASF, BMS, CAPS, Copart, Emacs, Integral, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Innovation Group, Mercer, Nationwide Vehicle Recovery Assistance, S&G Response, and Sherwin-Williams, as well as our partners Aztec, the Green Part Specialists, Indasa and Prasco. And a little plug, if I may, Back to the Future ARC360, so we're back to physical events. Can you see what I've done there in the headline? I hope so. 25th of November at the British Motor Museum, so it'll be lovely to get back. Again, plenty more discussion, and again, we're going to try and make that as interactive as we possibly can. Come back to you guys. Huge thank you for giving up your time today. Really, really appreciate it. It's, in a strange way, lovely to be back with live webinars. Hope that doesn't sound too strange for anyone, but great to see everyone. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we'll catch up with you all soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone.